If I could be Captain Obvious for a moment, there's clearly a very significant difference between the number one overall pick in the draft and the 13th pick. But that doesn't mean that the 13th pick hasn't turned out some really, really talented players, especially in the last 10 years in the NBA. What should the Sacramento Kings expect from a 13th overall pick? And who are some of the big names that are drafted at 13 in the last 30 years in the NBA? We'll discuss right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time. Time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all off-season long. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now for free on Google Play or the App Store and game on. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. If you've listened to Locked On Kings, especially last week, now that we know the draft lottery is behind us, the Sacramento Kings, as expected, have the 13th overall pick in the 2024 draft. You would know, and you have heard my continuous conversation of the belief that the Kings will not actually make a selection with the 13th overall pick, or if they do, they'll be selecting for another team because they'll be trading that pick on draft night. I still think maybe the most likely scenario isn't the right wording for it. I think that's the route that is most appealing to Monty McNair and the Sacramento Kings front office, considering what they're trying to accomplish and more specifically what they need to accomplish this offseason, which is adding more win-now talent to help this team continue to compete or take their competitiveness up a level in a, as we know, very, very difficult Western Conference that doesn't look like it's going to get any easier anytime soon. So my belief still is that the Kings will trade or will look to trade the 13th pick. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it will happen, and that certainly doesn't mean that they can't and shouldn't do their research and look at prospects that they potentially could take at 13 for the Sacramento Kings. Now, I in my most recent episode of the Locked On Kings podcast, I listed out three names that very early on I could potentially see the Sacramento Kings taking at 13 that would address a significant need for this team, particularly with their perimeter defense, wing players, length and athleticism. That was pretty much what I'm looking for out of not just this draft, really out of the trade market, out of free agency. Those are the players that I think the Sacramento Kings are in desperate need of this offseason. And there are some names in this draft class that, at least intangibles-wise, measurables, things that we see hopefully translating from the college game to the professional game, in theory, it should help. But we're going to look at the 13th pick today with less of a focus on potential names and more of a focus on that spot in the draft, the talent historically that spot has turned out, and we'll look at if the Kings were to go the route of drafting a player at 13, what realistic expectations they should have for a player at that spot, who falls to that spot. Now, many of you have heard this draft be classified or considered a weaker draft. To me, that means that there's just less star power at the top. That doesn't necessarily mean that this draft class is loaded with players who are not good and are not talented and don't have bright NBA futures. It's more that there aren't huge names at the top of the draft like years past, right? Like the Keegan Murray draft with Paolo Banchero and Jabari Smith Jr. And, of course, the Zion Williamson draft with John Morant going number 2. Like, there's just less massive names at the top of the draft this year. That's what makes this a quote-unquote weaker draft class. But there's still a lot of talent there. So before we dive into what the Kings should realistically expect, or what I feel and what maybe you feel the Kings should expect from the 13th pick, let's talk about what the 13th pick has become in recent memory. Now, we're going to look over the last 30 years for recent picks, but I first actually want to start with the franchise history. Now, there are only 3 selections at 13 in the entire history of the Kings franchise. That includes the Royals days, Kansas City, Rochester, Sacramento. It includes all of their history. Only 3 picks. One of them doesn't count because it was owned by, I think it was Miami or Denver or Detroit or whatever. It doesn't matter. So that one doesn't really count. So really, to me, there's only 2 picks, 2 selections that the Sacramento Kings have made at 13 in the franchise's history. The first one was in 1975, a player named Bob Bigelow. I don't expect you to know who that is. If you go and look up his history, he averaged 2 points a game for his career, played, I think, 5 years in the league. Didn't really do much. He was drafted when the Kings were in Rochester or Kansas City. One of the 2. I genuinely don't remember. I didn't write it down. Bob Bigelow, 1975. Doesn't really matter. The other one was 1995, when the Sacramento Kings took a name that probably should ring a bell for a handful of you, my OG Kings fans for sure, Corliss Williamson. Now, Corliss had an 11-year NBA career, won the 6th Man of the Year in the 2001-2002 season. He was an NBA champion in 2004, obviously not with the Sacramento Kings. He began his career and ended his career with Sacramento, but left and bounced around a little bit in the middle. For his career, he averaged 11 points and 4 rebounds a game. He played 822 career NBA games. So a long, successful career by championship standards and by individual standards. His stats based off of the era that he played in, 11 points and 4 rebounds per game in a 6-man role as a 13th overall pick. That's nothing shabby, nothing to turn your nose up at. Corliss Williamson was a very good basketball player. You got good talent. And Corliss, his first season in the league in 1995-1996, the Kings weren't necessarily a great basketball team. I think he averaged 5 points per game. Took a big jump from his first season to his second season where he went to 11 points per game. And then took another jump even beyond that, his third season in the league, all in Sacramento, to 17 or 18 points per game. And he was in the conversation at that time for most improved player. I think he came in second for most improved player voting that season. So we're talking about a player that developed pretty quickly, had a pretty successful NBA career coming from the 13th spot in the history of the Sacramento Kings. So that's encouraging to some extent. And also, friendly reminder too, I know we're focusing on the 13th pick, and picks around it don't really matter, but just to give you an idea of the range of talent in Kings history that's been selected around 13, Tyrese Halliburton was selected 12th. Peja Stojakovic was selected 14th. So there have been some very successful Sacramento Kings players. Some of the best draft picks in Kings history have come right around that 12, 13, 14 range. So maybe that's encouraging for you. But let's look at the history of the 13th pick, at least over the last 30 years. And what should jump off the page to you pretty quickly here is that in the, before 2020, there's a handful of seasons or years before 2020 that this pick or this spot in the draft turned out a lot of really, really good talent. You'll pick up on that trend pretty quickly. Let's start with the first one that I wrote down is notable, not because this player is great, but because this player is familiar. The 13th overall pick in the 2021 NBA draft was Chris Duarte. Now, Chris unfortunately battled injuries for the couple seasons in Indiana, came over to Sacramento. We were all, or a lot of us were pretty excited about the addition of Chris Duarte. And this past season here in Sac, he really didn't do much, right? So he's still very early in his career. We're not at a position where I'm going to say that was a bust of a pick or a failure of a pick at 13. But, it kind of gives you an idea of the level of talent kind of at that area. In 2019, the Miami Heat drafted Tyler Hero with the 13th overall pick. It's a great draft selection for Miami. In 2017, Donovan Mitchell drafted by the Utah Jazz at 13th, and we see what he's been doing for the Cleveland Cavaliers in the playoffs. He's an absolute bona fide superstar. That pick hurts because, remember, the Kings had the 5 pick and the 10 pick in that draft. They took De'Aaron Fox at 5, and they traded 10 for, I think, 15 and 20. And they took Justin Jackson and Harry Giles when they could have had, not just Bam Adebayo, they could have had Donovan Mitchell and have their backcourt solidified. Whatever. That's the past. We don't have to worry about that necessarily. But 2017. So in 2019 and 2017, the 13th overall pick turned out Tyler Hero and Donovan Mitchell. 2016, though, the 13th overall pick was Yorgos Papagiannis, who the Sacramento Kings famously traded Marquise Chris for on draft night. They drafted Marquise Chris, and the Suns drafted Yorgos Papagiannis. They agreed to swap both of those picks, and the Kings got the rights to Bogdan Bogdanovic in that trade. So it kind of worked out well for the Kings, but Yorgos Papagiannis was considered, maybe that's kind of an outlier for 13 because almost nobody had Papagiannis on their board going that high, and the Kings just kangsed. I don't know. I still don't know what Vlade was doing there, but that happened in 2016 at the 13th spot. In 2015, Devin Booker was selected 13th overall by the Phoenix Suns, one of the best shooting guards in the league. In 2014, Zach LaVine was drafted 13th overall. Now there's a big gap from here of good selections. There's some recognizable names like Markieff Morris, I think was a 13th overall pick during this gap, but we have to go all the way down to 2006. Thabo Sefolosha was drafted. Now the reason why I included Sefolosha in this list is notable is Sefolosha made an all-NBA defensive team. And that's important because Sacramento would love to try and find an all-NBA defensive caliber player. Granted, Sefolosha was not an all-NBA defensive player his first or second year in the league, which the Kings are looking for immediate help. But 13 turned out an all-defensive type player in Sefolosha. Then we jump all the way down to 2001. Richard Jefferson, very successful, very famous NBA career. A lot of you now watch him on broadcasts and NBA television and things like that. So you see Richard Jefferson there. Then there's 1996. A man by the name of Kobe Bryant was drafted 13th overall. In 1994, Jalen Rose was drafted 13th overall. So in the last 30 years, some big names have been selected at 13. Again, Jalen Rose, Kobe Bryant, Zach LaVine, Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell, Tyler Hero. Some big names that have been selected 13th overall. In fact, 15 players in the last 30 years, so half of the time over the last 30 years, the 13th overall pick has turned out a player that has played more than 500 career games. Now, I picked that 500 number because it's an easy, kind of fun, comfortable number to put there. And I should also preface this. Like, some of these guys, I don't think, like Tyler Hero hasn't played 500 career games yet. I believe he's going to, right? We believe he's going to play 500 career games unless, God forbid, knock on wood, he gets injured and we don't want to. But I can comfortably say in the last 30 years, 15 players that have been drafted have either played 500 or more games or will absolutely play 500 or more games in their career. I can confidently say that with half of the draft picks over the last 30 years at 13. So that's pretty good. What does that say? That means that there is talent available at that spot. You could get a player that could be franchise changing, although it absolutely should not be the expectation, and that it is still a very good spot to end up with a piece that can have a successful career. But successful career and successful next couple of seasons are two very different things. In just a second, we're going to look at realistic expectations for Sacramento with the 13th pick should they decide not to trade it and select a player. We'll go through all that here in just a second. Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I talk a lot about this game, not just because I'm obligated to, because of their great sponsorship. I talk a lot about this game because it is the first mobile game in a very, very, very long time that's got me completely hooked. Look, I was never into the Clash of Clans type stuff. Like the last app mobile game that I think I played religiously was like Fruit Ninja or Flappy Bird or something like that. And even then, that was more of an arcade game. This is a whole new twist on the board game that either you love or you despise. There typically is no middle ground. You either really, really like Monopoly or you absolutely can't stand it. My wife is one of those people that cannot stand Monopoly, refused to play with me, still to this day has not played the actual board game with me. But she plays Monopoly Go with me. That's because we can team up for timed tournaments. We work together to build up each other's boards. The more we win together, the more awesome prizes that we unlock, like unique stickers to trade, to complete albums for big prizes. We get cool new playing pieces to travel the board, so you don't just have to do the dog or the boot or the top hat or all the classic ones. There also are hilarious emojis that you can send to one another. We send them to each other all the time after we rob each other or destroy each other's buildings or stuff like that. Oh, yeah, I can get pretty competitive. Monopoly Go, it feels new and it feels exciting. Every single time you play it, they have constantly changing tournaments and all sorts of challenges for you to play and a ton of unique mini games as well. There's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything that you win or even rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover on Monopoly Go, so go get off the bench and get in on the action. Download the game for free on Google Play or the App Store and game on. Locked On Kings is also brought to you by FanDuel. It is winner take all time in the NBA and NHL playoffs, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own right away with a very low risk. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's it. $5 of your own money. Bet it on a extreme favorite that's basically guaranteed to hit, even if it only pays you pennies on the dollar, right? Because that doesn't matter. Once you win, here's $150 in bonus bets for you right away to play the real way. $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. So we've gone through a list of names that have come from the 13th spot. Maybe you're encouraged by that. Some of the great names that you've read, especially in recent memory. That also suggests to me that even though there have been some misses and some players have slid further in the draft than they should have, as we can see with the state of the Western Conference, as we can see with the competitiveness of the NBA today, there's just so many stars and so much talent in the league right now that absolutely you can get a good player at the 13th spot. But it's a very, very small chance of a franchise-altering player, right? It doesn't mean it's impossible, but it should absolutely not be the expectation. If you end up getting a Donovan Mitchell-type player or a Devin Booker-type player at 13, fan-freaking-tastic. And I'm certainly rooting for the Kings to somehow strike gold that way with 13. And if they do that, man, are they going to be in a great spot? I also don't think the Kings are approaching this draft necessarily looking for that the same way you would be approaching this draft if you had a top 4 or top 5 pick, right? That's why bad teams are picking at that spot typically because, well, the Atlanta Hawks, to be fair, are not that bad, but they're looking for some help as well. But a team like the Detroit Pistons, who had worst case scenario happen to them on draft lottery night, right? They are still looking, even with Cade Cunningham, they're looking for franchise-altering talent. They need that from their picks. Sacramento doesn't necessarily need that. They'd love it. They'd absolutely take it if they could. If there was a guaranteed star, they would 100% do what they could to go out and get that guaranteed star. That being said, this team does not need 13 to hit and be an A-plus diamond in the rough type incredible talent for this to be a successful offseason and for this to be a successful draft for them. The cool thing about it's never an advantage. But the cool thing about selecting at 13 and selecting outside of the top 10, even though it's still lottery, to me, that's where it's a little easier and you feel a little more comfortable getting away from best talent available or highest upside and going more for need, right? The Kings have gotten themselves in trouble when they've been towards the top of the lottery time and time again, top 5, top 8, top 10 pick, going with a player that was more need than talent available. That's burned the Kings in the past, right? Outside of the top 10, if the Kings decided to go 13 with their 13th pick, and let's say they go and get a player who's an older prospect or even a younger prospect who fills a need right away and turns out to have a pretty solid NBA career that maybe contributes as a role player for Sacramento as early as next season. But taken 15th is a player that had all this upside, and he develops into a, let's say if there's a redraft, a top 10 talent in the redraft for this year, and turns into a player that maybe has all-star potential. I think the Kings can feel a little bit better about that than the 12 teams ahead of them that also passed on that guy. So outside of the top 10, you can feel a little more comfortable going need over talent. The Kings should be hoping to find someone, looking hard to find someone that legitimately has a chance to crack the rotation immediately. And in order to do that, that requires them to, for lack of a better term, be Mike Brown guys. Like, go out and find somebody that has to win over a coach by playing the way that that coach is asking and expecting the entire roster to play as a rookie on a team that has deep playoff expectations and competitive expectations in an incredibly difficult conference, right? That is a lot to ask from a 13th pick. I'm aware that is a lot to ask, but that is what the Sacramento Kings should be looking for at 13. If you feel there is a guy there that does that, then you can feel confident taking that player. If you don't feel that there's a guy there that does that, then it is in the best interest of this organization to find a way to trade that pick on draft night. At least that's my opinion. And it's less likely, certainly a lot less likely that the Kings find that player and that player is there at 13 than it is likely that that player would be there. It is a good spot, though, to look for a guy that has kind of that dog mentality, right? And these are players that the Kings need more of, guys that are just willing to, I mean, very similar to Keon Ellis, but even with a little more personality on top of that, like guys that are just willing to fight, scratch, claw, work. These are not guys that have been guaranteed top five-star McDonald's All-American since high school, AAU ball prodigies since they were young, right? Guys that knew that they had to fight and scratch and claw if they wanted to make their NBA dream a reality. Not that those five-star recruits don't work hard. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there are the prodigies, and then there are the guys that make it to the NBA by sheer determination, hard work, right? You have a better chance of finding some of those sheer determination and hard work dogs, guys that are going to get into the league and go, I'm not going to get punked. I'm not going to get pushed around. I worked for this. I earned this, and I'm going to keep working to keep my spot. I think there's a good chance that you can find a guy or two like that at that 13 range. Is it realistic to hope for a player that can immediately contribute at 13? Yes, I think that's realistic. Is it likely? Maybe not, but realistic? Sure. As recent history will show you, there are talented players that have gotten better with every year, don't get me wrong, and they weren't all-stars immediately coming into the league, but they had a tremendous amount of upside. And, well, I mean, in Donovan Mitchell's case, Donovan Mitchell came into the league as a 13th overall pick and turned the Utah Jazz around immediately. It was a star immediately for Utah. So there's definitely a chance. Again, it's not likely, but there's a chance. But it's not realistic to me to expect a Keegan Murray-type impact as a rookie. I've been over this before, but Keegan Murray was selected 4th overall, came into the league, had high expectations. Remember, didn't start day one either. Now, a lot of that was because I think he got COVID right before he started his rookie season, if you remember. But to expect the Kings to go out and get another rookie and just say they'll do, or they can make the similar impact that Keegan Murray made as a rookie, that's not realistic. I also don't think it's realistic at all to look at number 13 and hope to find a player that is any sort of replacement for a piece that you might move on from or who might leave, a.k.a. Malik Monk, certainly, and even like a Harrison Barnes. Like, I know Harrison, it's not impossible to replace what Harrison does, but asking a 13th overall pick to fill Harrison's shoes if the Kings were to use Harrison in some kind of deal, asking for 13 to replace anybody who's not a fringe role player on this roster, that's a lot to ask, and you're gambling against yourselves, and more than likely you're going to be a worse basketball team. But those are the expectations that you can have for 13. What are your expectations for 13? What do you expect the Kings to do with that pick? Let me know. At MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by my good friends at Sacyard Community Tap House. I love the people at Sacyard, and they are absolutely killing it right now as a business. Hey, I know it's heating up in Sacramento, but a great way to cool down is getting a nice ice-cold beer, hanging out on their outdoor patio or inside with your friends, watching playoff basketball, watching baseball during the afternoon. The WNBA season tipped off tonight. If you're looking for sporting events, it's a great place to go. If you're just looking for a place to chill with your friends, get a beer after work, enjoy a Friday or Saturday night, enjoy some live music, even some live trivia, some great food, Sacyard has it all for you. And they even encourage you not just to bring your family, like your kids and your young ones, with their outdoor patio area and their play area. They have lawn games out there for you too. Also, bring your dogs. Bring your kids with tails, right? Bring them. There are so many dogs that are always present. It's highly encouraged there. Sacyard is great. The first ever live sponsor of the Locked On Kings podcast did so much for me this season. I'm eternally grateful to them, and I had so much fun working with them this year and hope that we can continue to work together for many, many years to come. But no matter what the future holds, I will always be a fan of Sacyard. I'll always be a place that it'll a go-to place for me to just hang out, to get a drink, to have a good time. Also, it will forever be a home, if not the home, of the Locked On Kings listener. When you go to Sacyard, make sure you mention Locked On Kings. You'll get 10% off your tab. Sacyard is your home for the Locked On Kings listener. Before we wrap up, I wanted to take the time to talk about something that's been quite the talker in Sacramento today, even though it has to do with a Bay Area basketball team. The WNBA expansion franchise in the Bay Area has officially released their name and has released their brand and their logo. They are the Golden State Valkyries. If you're not familiar with what a Valkyrie is, in Norse mythology, a Valkyrie is like a legendary warrior woman, right? The from Valhalla, and they had their wings, and they fought in the sky, fought on land, fought in the sea. Like the elitist of the elite, the baddest of the bad, you know what, women, like just absolute legendary warriors in Norse mythology. So I think it's an awesome name for a WNBA team. Awesome name. Well done them. Then the brand came out. The branding came out. We saw their logo. It's a V for the Valkyrie. Has the Tower Bridge, the Bay Bridge, not the Tower Bridge, worked into it. Bay Bridge, by the way, wonderful bridge. Never get rid of it. And it had like the chords of the bridge, or the lines on the logo represent 13, which is they're the 13th franchise in the WNBA. Like all this cool stuff. Really, really cool. But the colors are what have people in Sacramento talking, because the Golden State Valkyries will be lavender and black. Now, it's a different shade than the royal purple of the Sacramento Kings and, of course, the former WNBA franchise, WNBA champions, the Sacramento Monarchs. But there's some Sacramentans that aren't too happy with the essentially purple and black coloring that the Valkyries chose as a Bay Area basketball team. I got no problem with it. None at all. And here's why. One, they're my favorite colors in the world, and they look fantastic, and I think it's brilliant branding to use those colors, and I hope that they do what the Sacramento Kings have been doing less and less of, and truly embrace those colors and not try and go to blues and pinks and whatever, and reds and whatever the hell to replace it. Stick with your freaking colors, god dang it. That's a thing that I can be an old man, get off my lawn about. But I have no problem with it because, look, we know that the WNBA wants the Sacramento fan base. Why wouldn't they? Right? The Sacramento fan base is rabid. They love the NBA. Obviously, they love their Sacramento Kings. They love the Monarchs when they were here. The Monarchs folded not because of any fault of the city of Sacramento or the fan base. It folded because owners ran out of money, right? And the WNBA wasn't really making money at that time. So they want the Sacramento fan base. But the reality is, even if the WNBA continued to expand, Northern California getting 2 WNBA expansion franchises, when there's so many big cities and great cities around the world, or around the country, that don't have them, yeah, it's not realistic. This is going to be Northern California's WNBA team. The same way the Monarchs were the WNBA team for Bay Area kids years ago, the Valkyries are probably going to be the WNBA team for Sacramento fans. I'm not saying that's the reason they chose the colors, but if that helps you like the colors a little bit more, I'm all for it. The Monarchs returning, unfortunately, is likely never happening, not just because of the unlikelihood of two Northern California WNBA franchises, but because look at what Sacramento is focusing on right now. Look at what Vivek Ranadive is focusing on right now. This city is all in right now on the MLB and the Oakland A's. That's what their focus is on. Now, some of you might be frustrated. Why didn't you even try to go for the Monarchs? I have no idea if they did or didn't. I hadn't heard anything, so my guess is they didn't. They have their eyes set on other things. I wish the Monarchs would come back. It would be awesome for the Monarchs to come back. I will both professionally cover and I will personally support the Valkyries because having the WNBA that close is going to be freaking awesome, especially with where the WNBA is right now, which tonight was opening day. Caitlin Clark played her first game. There's just so much talent in the WNBA right now. I think it's exciting and fantastic for the game. So I definitely will support it. I'm all for the purple and black. I look forward to getting some Valkyries gear. The only thing that the Valkyries can't have is the beam, right? If they try and do their own version of the beam, they do their own like little bat symbol V in the sky or something like that, and it's purple. You can have the colors. We can work together in that sense. If the Chase Center shoots anything purple into the sky at all after a Valkyries game or during a Valkyries game or after a win or whatever, I'm going to rip them to shreds. Because they're Big Brother, remember? They're Big Brother to Sacramento. Well, Big Brother doesn't typically copy Little Brother unless Little Brother has surpassed them. Just saying. No beam. No beam for you. You can have the colors. I'll support the Valkyrie completely. You start taking the beam or similar things like that in addition to the Kings colors, Sacramento's colors. Oh, yeah. Not going to sit great with me. But I love the idea of the Valkyries. I think it's really, really cool. Can't wait for them to start their first season in 2025. On the next show here on Locked On Kings, we're really going to focus on, is this the offseason for the all-in move? In particular, is this the offseason for you to take and package a boatload of first-round picks and go all in, make your swing? And we can kind of partner that conversation into the conversation happening right now for Brandon Ingram. Reports are that the Pelicans are going to trade or look to trade and move on from Brandon Ingram, should the Kings aggressively be pursuing Ingram. And if they're going to do that without including Keegan Murray, it's going to take draft compensation. This is a conversation that's been happening a lot on ESPN 1320, in particular the Insiders with Kyle Madsen and James Ham. I'm going to try and get Kyle on the podcast so we can discuss this further because I love the idea of it. I've said in the past, I don't necessarily think the Kings feel they have to go that route, but also guys like Kyle bring up a great point. At some point, you got to do something. And if you have all these assets freed up and you continue to not do anything with them in the Western Conference that is just getting better and better, and you're at risk of being left behind and wasting the years of the prime years of your stars right now, what the hell are you doing if that's the route you're going? So we'll discuss that in great detail. Prepare to jump in on that conversation. I look forward to having you for that. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.